Okay, so now we are coming to the Upakilesa Sutta. This is the fourth sutta in this little collection here. MN 128, Upakilesa, Corruptions, is the name of the sutta. It's a very kind of well-known sutta. It belongs to it's a number of suttas that kind of are on the same, occur around the same event, the same historical event in Buddhism, which was an argument in the Sangha that occurred at a certain point. And so this is around that, and this is just the latter half of the sutta. The first half of the sutta concerns this argument and how it happened and kind of the consequences of the argument. And one of the consequences, which actually is quite interesting, I may talk a little bit about that later on, is that they invited the Buddha to come in and to help them resolve the argument. And then the Buddha said, "Stop arguing." And then they said, "Oh, let the Blessed One, let the Blessed One just, live at ease and meditate. Yeah, we will look after this." Basically asking the Buddha to leave. That's basically what they were doing here. And so it's kind of very fascinating, and the reason why it is fascinating is because it shows you the Buddha as a human being. Yeah, he's one of the monks in a sense. You can't do that if the Buddha is like a god or whatever. Yeah, a good Buddha is just completely different. He's one of the people, and they relate to him much like I might relate to Ajahn Brahm. I don't think I ever said that to Ajahn Brahm, please leave. But it is a similar kind of idea. It's like human beings relating to each other, and sometimes this is how it happens. And this is one of the reasons why this is interesting, this interaction between the monastics and the Buddha. So that's how it starts. And then the Buddha tries to persuade them, and he says a series of verses coming earlier on in the sutta, beautiful series of verses that you also find in the Dhammapada, you find them in the Vinaya, you find them in a number of places. That's where you find the Ovada Patimokkha, the standard, that very famous verse about not doing anything bad, doing good, purifying the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Akusalasa akaranang. How's it go again? Savapapasa akaranang, kusalasa pasampada, sachittang paryodapanang, etang buddhana sasanang. Thank you. Good. Just had to get the beginning right. Okay, so and then there's a number of other verses there as well that are very kind of famous and well known in Buddhist circles, especially Theravada circles, obviously. And then the Buddha, no one listens to him. He just decides to leave, and so he leaves the monks. And the idea, of course, is that if no one is listening to you, there's not much point in kind of trying again and again and again. So eventually you leave, and that, of course, that leaving very often, that kind of gets people's attention. The Buddha is gone. Wait, what are we going to do now? Who's going to give the Dhamma talks? What are we going to do? And you feel a bit like a child who's lost a little bit if the spiritual master has disappeared and you're left on your own. So because of that, they quickly, again, soon afterwards, they come to their senses and they then go to the Buddha to ask for forgiveness and to reconcile and these kind of things. But what we're going to look at now is what happens when the Buddha leaves. Where does he go? And where he goes to the monks who are like the example of what good monks should be like. So it's like the kind of, you have on the one hand the dodgy monks, the scallywags who argue and are dodgy, and then you get the contrast with the ideal kind of monk. So that's what we're going to look at. So what do the ideal monks, what are they like? What kind of meditation do they do? And this is what this comes out from this, how they approach the meditation practice. And there's a lot to be learned from that. So let's just get started with this. So I have heard, at one time the Buddha was staying near Kosambi in Gosita's monastery. Now, at that time, the mendicants of Kosambi were arguing, quarreling, and disputing, continually wounding each other with barbed words. This is kind of the standard phrase for arguing in the suttas. The word for barbed words in Pali is mukha satehi. And mukha satehi literally means the sword or the knife of the mouth. Yeah, so you use the knife of the mouth to wound your your fellow people who you're arguing with. So this is the problematic, using kind of bad language or harsh language to hurt each other. And so that is the background. And of course, they were arguing about a trivial matter. That's what people usually argue about, trivial matters. The important things, we may argue about them as well, but usually trivial matters is what life is full of, arguing about silly things. So then the Buddha leaves, and he departs, and then he goes first of all to a monk called Bhagu. And then when he goes to Bhagu, then he says here, then the Buddha educated, encouraged, fired up, and inspired Bhagu with a Dhamma talk, after which he got up from his seat and set out for the Eastern Bamboo Park. Eastern Bamboo Park, this is the place where these three ideal monks live. So now we get the story of the three ideal monks. Now at that time, the venerables Anuruddha, Nandya and Kimbila were staying in the Eastern Bamboo Park. The park keeper saw the Buddha coming off in the distance and said to the Buddha, "Don't come into this park, ascetic. There are three gentlemen staying here whose nature is to desire only the self. Don't disturb them." So that's already kind of weird, that this is what is going on here. So first of all, you have these three. These are all Sakyans. So they was the Buddha's family. Anuruddha, of course, very well known. But Nandya and Kimbila also apparently became arahants. So they were all three of them were really the top-class monks. And they were staying in this monastery called the Eastern Bamboo Park. Couldn't have been too far from Kosambi. And then the park keeper, the person in charge of where they're staying, or maybe you could say the monastery keeper. I wonder what the Pali is, Aramika, maybe. Maybe it should be monastery keeper instead. Because if they were staying there, if it was a monastery, then monastery keeper makes sense. Okay, the reason I bring my computer is that I can look up these kind of things as we go along. So now finally, I don't know if you are even remotely interested in this, but I'm being very selfish because I want to find out what's going on here. So sometimes there's endless little problems in the suttas, and this is an important thing to understand when you read translations, because no translation is ever going to be perfect. Every translation is going to have problems with it. And so we should not really strive for perfection, because there's no such thing here, of course. And that's why I should probably just let this go. But this is obsession. What obsession does for you? So where are we here? Sorry, I can't. It's quite Dayapalo. Dayapalo is the word. So that's the pala is like a guardian. Dayapalo. Daya is like a grove or a place, a park. So park keeper. That makes sense in this case. It doesn't say arama or anything. Okay, good. We have sorted out that essential question. That's very, very happy. So, but then he doesn't recognize the Buddha, and that's kind of already very interesting. Because according to the suttas, you have this very strange thing called the Dvatingsa Mahapurisa Lakkhana, which are the 32 marks of a great person. And this idea, no one really knows where it comes from, but it is the idea that if you are a person of a certain kind, you will have these 32 marks. And you will see that on the Buddha statue over here. A few of those marks are on that Buddha statue. One of them is what is called the Ushnisa or Usnisa, which is the kind of the top knot, or the kind of the head being having this protrusion on the top. That's one of them. The other one is the hair. You can see the Buddha statue is the only monk in the world who is depicted with hair. And the reason for that is because it depicts one of these 32 marks, which is each pore has one hair coming out and it curls clockwise in one direction. That is one of the 32 marks. It's already slightly strange, isn't it? And then you have the Unna. The Unna is the kind of the dot usually between the eyebrows in the middle, because the Buddha is supposed to have one eyebrow going across. And that's marked by this little mark in front. And those are the 3 marks of a great person that you normally see on the Buddha statue, 3 out of the 32. The rest are not usually, you don't usually see, they're not usually depicted here. What are we to make of these 32 marks? Well, if the Buddha really had those 32 marks, he would really stand out. Yeah, according to some commentaries, he was 3 times the height of an ordinary person. You would know who the Buddha was if he was 3 times the height. And so all of these things are kind of, they don't really make much sense. And I think that this quite likely is some sort of later addition to kind of show that the Buddha was who he claimed to be through his appearance and these kind of things, as part of the social conventions of the time, or social mythology or legends of the time as to how such a person should look. And if you look at those suttas that do have those 32 marks, they are a little bit kind of doubtful whether they really have belong to the original core of suttas. They have this kind of strange vocabulary, different ideas that come in, the commentarial kind of attitudes to them. And so these suttas are not all the one block of the word of the Buddha. There is a little bit of variety to them. Generally speaking, they are. And this is a small thing, it doesn't really matter all that much, but it is kind of still handy. To me, it matters a little bit, because we want to see the Buddha as a human being. This is one of the things that distinguishes Buddhism from all other religions. Yeah, all other religions have everything else. Buddhism has a human being at the center of what we are, where we're looking for inspiration and looking for, something positive in our lives. And that is extraordinary, and it's very valuable. It's incredibly valuable, because we can then relate to the Buddha, human to human. We can ask questions. He can tell us what life is like, because he has the same life, etc., etc. And so, to me, it matters that we actually see the Buddha in a normal way. And this is what we see here. He doesn't recognize the Buddha. He must have been fairly ordinary, I think, is the conclusion that we can draw from that. Then Bhante Sujato has this interesting translation here. There are 3 gentlemen staying here whose nature is to desire only the self. Attakama rupaha is the Pali word for that. Don't disturb them, because they desire the self. So, is that correct? Is that translation? The standard translation is that they desire their own benefit. That's the usual translation. Here are 3 ascetics, or 3 gentlemen aspiring for their own benefit, or something like that. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do think this is an interesting idea. This comes from his study of the pre-Buddhist texts, the Upanishads, and trying to understand the Buddhist teachings in light of those Upanishadic texts. And this park keeper, someone who was keeping the park, he probably wasn't a Buddhist, so he probably didn't know what was going on. And so he probably assumed that they were actually seeking the self. He probably didn't have any understanding of Buddhist doctrine or whatever. And so it is a plausible solution, a plausible translation. It's certainly very interesting. So you've got to give it to Bhante Sujato. He can be very interesting. He can come up with left field views that no one else in the whole world will come up with usually. You can make sure he does that. But either way, it either means 3 Kulaputta gentlemen, 3 clansmen, 3 kind of proper people, either living for their own benefit or seeking the self. Minding their own business. Yes. So I guess that's kind of the bottom line. They're minding their own business. They're kind of looking after their own spiritual practice. They don't want to deal with anyone. So maybe that's a good translation. Suggest that to Bhante Sujato, see what he says. There were 3 gentlemen minding their own business. Now please go away. That's an interesting idea. Okay, I think he probably will object to that, but you can try. See what happens. So, then Anuruddha heard the park keeper conversing with the Buddha. and said to him, "Don't keep the Buddha out, good parkeeper. Our teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." Then Anuruddha went to Nandya and Kimbala and said to them, "Come forth, venerables, come forth, the teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." Then Anuruddha, Nandya and Kimbala came out to greet the Buddha. One received his bowl and robe, one spread out the seat, and one set out water for washing his feet. The Buddha sat down on a seat spread out and washed his feet. Those venerables bowed and sat down to one side. So, you do kind of the duties that you're supposed to do to someone who is visiting. You look after them in a reasonable way. Receive the bowl and robe. You put out water. It is quite notable here that the Buddha washes his own feet. That's kind of notable, because in the modern day it's very common for monks to have their feet washed. Someone comes up and washes your feet. Ajahn Brahm tells the story of people fighting to get hold of one toe of Ajahn Chah. They can wash at least one toe. The whole foot, that was demanding way too much, but if you got one toe, you were very lucky. But the Buddha washed his own feet, and so that's kind of really interesting. Again, it shows you that the Buddha was in some ways, more ordinary at that time than monks are treated in the present day, which is kind of a little bit strange when you think about it. So they bowed, and then they sat down to one side. And then the Buddha said to Anuruddha, "I hope you are keeping well, Anuruddha and friends. I hope you are all right. I hope you're having no trouble getting alms food." So this is how the Buddha almost begins all conversations. Of course, this has been standardized over time, because that's kind of how the suttas work. But there's something very touching about that. The Buddha looks after you. The Buddha is a bit like your father. He makes sure that, okay, are you okay? Are you looked after? Do you have the necessities of life, etc.? And there's something very right about that. They have left the ordinary family life. They don't have parents or family anymore. They have to look after each other. There's no one else to look after you. And this is the Buddha here showing that example. And there are a number of places in the suttas where the Buddha goes way beyond just asking. There's a very famous story where the Buddha looks after the sick monk. Many of you probably heard about that story. It is depicted on murals in monasteries and things because it's a very famous story. And the Buddha and Venerable Ananda, they clean up this monk who has dysentery. And they clean him up, put on new robes and put him to bed. The Buddha does this. And that's kind of extraordinary. And so you see here the Buddha as interacting in a very normal but also very caring and kind way with the community of monks around him, and also the lay people, of course. So these little things, it shows the right way of conduct, if you like. And then you notice Anuruddha and friends. That's because Anuruddha is in the plural, so Anuruddhas, quite literally. So in other words, all three of them. "We're keeping well, sir. We are all right, and we're having no trouble getting alms food." Okay, so the politeness, the niceties have kind of got that out of the way, and then we get down to business. "I hope you are living in harmony, appreciating each other, without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes." "Indeed, sir, we live in harmony, as you say." So this is obviously here in contrast to the other monks. The other monks were not living in harmony, so he asks this first of all. And so you give here this idea of what harmony actually means. This is what it means to live in harmony. It's kind of a very beautiful phrasing. Living in harmony, appreciating each other. Appreciating each other. That's kind of metta, karuna in practice. Wow, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for helping out. Thank you for all of these things. It is active appreciation of each other. And it's very useful on a retreat like this to have that active appreciation for your fellows here. Understanding how fortunate it is to have these kind of people as your friends, as your kalyana mittas. So beautiful ideas, appreciating each other, without quarreling, blending like milk and water, not blending like milk and water and oil. That's kind of a bad idea. This separates out. Regarding each other with kindly eyes. You look upon someone with kindly eyes. Yeah, you kind of, people get the feeling when they look at you, they don't glare at you. They look at you with a kind of a friendly eye. It's amazing what can be in a look. Yeah, you can almost anything. A look that kills and a look that is friendly. You have all of these various kind of looks. Indeed, sir, we live in harmony, as you say. But how do you live this way? And this is kind of where it gets really interesting. In this case, sir, I think I'm fortunate, so very fortunate, to live together with spiritual companions such as these. I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by way of body, speech and mind, both in public and in private. And I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and just go along with these venerables' ideas? And that's what I do. Though we are different in body, sir, we are one in mind, it seems to me. So this idea of thinking how fortunate you are, yeah, I'm so fortunate to have companions such as these. This is like the epitome of metta and compassion. Yeah, wow, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being a monk. Thank you for being a nun. Thank you for being a lay Buddhist who practices the 5 precepts or whatever it is that you practice, 8 or 5 or... yeah, what a wonderful thing that is, to have people like this in the world. People who support the practice, people I can live with, and when we come together we can kind of move together in harmony, and everyone can grow in the practice because we have that mutual support with each other. Yeah, we are lucky, this is the point, and we tend to forget it. Being part of a Buddhist community is something extraordinary here. We're part of this idea, this coming from the enlightened mind of the Buddha. He establishes the fourfold community here, and we are part of that. We're being kind of propelled along this path. We're coming behind, like you come behind a lorry and you pulled along the lorry here. Yeah, so we're kind of pulled along in the slipstream of the lorry, all of us, which is the awakening of the Buddha. That is what happens when you're part of these 4 assemblies. So it is extraordinarily fortunate. So remember this. This is this incredible fortune. It's so easy to forget. It's so easy to kind of be irritated by stupid little things instead of reminding oneself of how wonderful and exceptional this is. So you need to, and we need these reminders, again and again and again. And these are the ideal monks showing the way for how this is to be done. This is the real Kalyana Mittas. So very fortunate to live together with spiritual companions such as these. Brahmachari is the spiritual companions. I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by body, speech and mind, both in public and in private. So you're not kind of a hypocrite. You kind of pretend to be kind when you to the face, and behind the back you slag them off or whatever. No, you're always kind, private and public. Even when you think about them, you are kind. Everything is just kindness through and through, and that is required. That is the requirement to make real progress on this path. So it is again a very high bar to clear. But it gives you an idea here of what it is that we actually have to do to make this work. So consistently treat everyone with my body, speech and mind with kindness in public and in private. I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and go along with these venerables' ideas? Your ideas are not as important as you think. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes we argue over ideas. And very common among monks to argue among ideas. It says from the suttas, actually I'm just quoting the suttas, it says in the sutta that monks and nuns or monastics, they argue about ideas. Lay people argue about usually sensual things. That's kind of what the suttas say. Obviously this is not absolute, but that's kind of the idea in there. And it's true, monastics tend to argue about ideas very often. It's quite common, because you may disagree about things or whatever. So it is always a danger. But our ideas are usually not as important as we think they are. Yeah, and even if your idea, sometimes it's like if your idea is a little bit better than someone else's idea, okay, so what? You let it go and you go for the slightly inferior idea, because the execution of the idea is often more important than whether you get the best one. The idea that is best is the combination of the idea with how it is executed. And if you get the best idea by arguing, then the execution is going to be bad, and so the whole thing gets dragged down. But if you come to an idea, if you agree in harmony, then even if it's not the best idea, because the execution is going to be good afterwards, because you're working together, the whole thing turns out better. And so sometimes it doesn't matter so much. Just make the best of whatever you have. Okay, let go of your idea. Maybe you are the most brilliant person, but you become even more brilliant if you let go of that brilliance. That's the idea here. Yeah. 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 Ends. Ant. Idea of an ant. Aha. Aha. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's a nice way of reducing your conceit about your ideas. If it's small, tiny ant, yeah, that's nice. Yeah. Okay. So remember that your ideas are like the ant's ideas. Yes. Should you walk? How fast should you walk between, whatever? Ants probably have very simple ideas. That's right. Okay, that's very nice. And so this is what we have to do, yeah. And then, of course, you can live in harmony if you live in this way. Now, what is interesting about this whole sutta is that now, having kind of laid down this idea of metta and compassion and kindness and living well with the people around you, now soon, just another little passage in between, comes the meditation experiences. Comes how to deal with the mind in meditation. That is the next thing that is coming up. So this here is the foundation for meditation. This kind of summarizes everything that you have to do to make meditation possible. If you can do this, that's really all you have to do. Okay, so maybe that's not all, because if you think about everyone, I'm so fortunate, that's pretty amazing already. But that kind of summarizes almost the entire path up to meditation. So again, it's this idea of sila being the foundation of everything. The idea that our attitude to the world, to people, this is the foundation that matters for everything. Everything else emerges out of that. It's a constant in the suttas. You find it again and again and again, and you also find it here. So this is, I think, why people have problems in meditation, because they do not apply themselves profoundly enough to sila. That is really the bottom line, and we see it right here. Okay, and then the Venerables Nandiya and Kimbila spoke likewise, and they added, that is how we live in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes. Good, Anuruddha and friends, but I hope you live diligently, keen and resolute. Indeed, sir, we live diligently. So diligent, keen and resolute, that's appamada, attapi, pahitatta are the Pali words there. And appamada has a sense of wisdom usually related to it. It does not mean diligent in the sense of just working hard. Sometimes the word diligent can mean just that. You're really diligent, working. But it means wise working, diligent in a wise way. And so Bhikkhu Bodhi uses the translation heedfulness in this case, because you are heedful. Heedful is a bit more complicated word, but it implies that you are careful, circumspect. You consider things before you do them. And this is kind of implied here in this word, appamada. So this tells you how you have, that's quite important to understand, that is part of how you live in the right way, that you are diligent, that you are heedful, that you are careful, circumspect, you consider things, you're mindful. Should I do this? Should I do that? What is the right way forward here? Keen is I like that translation. It's really nice. It's for atapi, and atapi is related to the words for making an effort and words of energy in the suttas. It's somewhere in the same kind of ballpark of ideas. Energy and effort is slightly different in the suttas. Effort means you are trying, trying. Energy is a natural phenomenon of the mind. The mind is kind of energized. And so if you make effort in the right way, you come to energy at some point. And atapi seems to be somewhere in between those two. Atapi is used for meditation specifically. In the Satipatthana Sutta, you find the word atapi. You do not find the word for effort, which is padana or vayama, nor do you find the word for energy. Energy is usually confined to the 7 factors of awakening, virya, which then relates to samadhi usually. So atapi is then the meditation in between that you do when you move from right effort, meditate, and then you achieve samadhi at the other end. Atapi, keen is nicer. Paitatta, resolute. Paitatta is related to padana, so it means like applying yourself. Indeed, sir, we live diligently, but how do you live in this way? In this case, sir, whoever returns first from alms round prepares the seats and puts out the drinking water and the rubbish bin. If there's anything left over, whoever returns last eats it if they like. Otherwise, they throw it out where there is little that grows or drop it into water that has no living creatures. Then they put away the seeds, drinking water and rubbish bin and sweep the refectory. If someone sees that the pot of water for washing, drinking, or the toilet is empty, they set it up. And if he can't do it, he summons another with a wave of the hand, and they set it up by lending each other a hand to lift. But we don't break into speech for that reason. And every 5 days we sit together for the whole night and discuss the teachings. That is how we live, diligent, keen, and resolute. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Doesn't say anything about meditation. Doesn't say anything really about the Noble Eightfold Path in the ordinary way of thinking about it. It's almost as if they are expressing that Noble Eightfold Path through their conduct. This is kind of living in harmony in the highest way. You just do what is required. And if you see something needs to be done, you just do it. You don't really wait for someone else to do it. You take the initiative, you do it. You think of it as an opportunity. Yay, I can make some merit. Hooray! If no one else do it, yay, I get all the merit. They don't get anything. They are silly, stupid. They don't have the chance taking the opportunity. That's a wonderful way of looking at it. And then you can, but otherwise it's very easy to feel a bit resentful. Yeah, I have to do all the work. But actually in Buddhism, if you think about it in the right way, it's always an opportunity. Of course, there are limits to what we can do. There comes a point when almost everyone feels a bit resentful if no one else does anything. But this is kind of the idea here. So you do what is required. Working in harmony, not talking very much at all. They just wave with each other with a hand. That's not usually what happens at Bodhinyana Monastery, but never mind. It's rare to find this kind of quiet, even in good monasteries. And then they sit together every 5 days, to talk about the Dhamma and discuss the teachings. And so you almost have to read into this, that the Dhamma practice is happening there. You're just quiet. You just do your duties. And of course, meditation is obviously happening as part of this, and that is what comes next. Good, Anuruddha and friends, but as you live diligently like this, have you achieved any superhuman distinction, any knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones, a meditation at ease? So by living in this right way, having created the foundation for meditation, have you achieved anything that is, that is the purpose of the spiritual life? So here we have some very interesting ideas here that are very kind of important to get one's head around. Have you achieved? First of all, you have superhuman. I'm not sure if this translation here is a bit different from what I'm used to. Superhuman, uttarimanusa dhamma, means superhuman quality. And then you have something called the Alang Arya Nanadasana Visesa, which is a distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. And he has here merged the two into one thing, as if they are one kind of long string of one phrase. But usually it is understood as two different things, as superhuman qualities and a distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. And so I will treat it like that. So superhuman quality, Uttarimanusa Dhamma, these are the things that are outside of ordinary human experience. Usually human experience is related to the five senses. We are born into the five sense world. That is the karma we have made in the past, and so that's kind of why we are here now. So superhuman quality then is like a stepping out of that karma loka, going beyond that and seeing something more. And that means two separate things. Either it means one of the four jhanas, or it means one of the stages of awakening. These are these superhuman qualities. And the four jhanas, obviously, because they are outside of the sensory realm, sensory world, and the four stages of awakening, because it is like, understanding the ending of everything. It goes even beyond that. But what is very interesting about this is that, and this is something you see throughout the suttas, that the jhanas are on the same level as the four stages of awakening. The same level. They're all called Uttarimanusa Dhamma. They're all called Alang Arya Nanadasana Visesa. They're all called a meditation at ease. They are usually grouped together as one group. And that is incredibly significant. There's often a lot of discussion in the Buddhist world about what are the real jhanas. People say, Ajahn Brahm jhana is too difficult. That's kind of one of the standards you hear in the kind of Buddhist world. But it's not about whether it's difficult or easy. In fact, difficult is the wrong word for these things, because it's not like something you have to solve or anything like that. It is how developed you are. And so what matters is not whether it's difficult or easy. What matters is to get the right jhana, because if you don't get the right jhana, you're not fulfilling the path. If you're not fulfilling the path, well, you won't go to the end of the path. And so this here then is a very significant indication of the profundity of these states. They are always grouped together with the four stages of awakening. They are a similar kind of experience, ballpark, as the stages of awakening. When you come to the four jhanas, you're kind of just one doorway away, open one door, and bang, you enter those stages of awakening. Yes, that's why the jhanas are at the end of the Noble Eightfold Path, because from that point, all you have to do is a slight shift in perception, and then you reach stream entry or arahantship or whatever it might be. And so this is very useful information to know a little bit about how to interpret these states. I'm sure everyone here has a very kind of has been brainwashed by Bhante Sujato to by all of these things anyway, so you know what's going on. But the little things like this are very helpful in understanding how the path works. So if a jhana is you feel a little bit of piti, a little bit of happiness, okay, that must be the first jhana. Well, that means awakening is also very low, right? It's just an ordinary thing. It's like those internet arahants. You know those internet arahants? You kind of go to the homepage, arahant so-and-so, okay, straight away you know that's not an arahant. And so this is kind of the thing, and then you go back to work and all these kind of things afterwards, after you become an arahant. And so everything gets brought down. And so actually, if we have some sense that awakening really is profound, that it is the ending of all defilements, that it is the highest happiness achievable, that it is the ending of rebirth, that you know that you have ended rebirth, once you start to get your head around what it means, you understand that all of these things must be very special. And this is one of the reasons why, personally, I always felt that Ajahn Brahm was the one who taught the real jhanas. One of the reasons why I've stayed with him for so long, because I read the suttas, I read what he said, I thought this makes sense. And it is not that common in the world to find people who explain these profound states in quite the way that he does, and it aligns with the way the Buddha does. So this is one of these indications. And then, so that's the Uttarimanusa Dhamma, the superhuman qualities. then it is the Allang Arya Nanadasana Visesa, a distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the Aryas, the noble ones. Distinction. Did I mention this at the beginning about knowledge and vision being here? I think I did actually. Knowledge and vision is a word here used for the jhanas. With the jhanas comes knowledge and vision. Jhanas are a distinction in knowledge and vision. People often talk about jhanas as if they are, this is just samadhi, this is the samatha, but the Buddha calls it knowledge and vision. It's kind of, this is very interesting and not something that you will normally hear. It's not just any knowledge and vision, it is a knowledge and vision worthy of the Aryas. So what that means is that if you achieve a jhana, you are basically kind of Aryan material. That's what it means. Because it is worthy, that state you have is what is worthy of the noble ones. That is what the noble ones expect to achieve when they practice the Dhamma. Because their mind knows where happiness is to be found, they know where dukkha is, it climbs towards the happiness, they can let go easily because they understand what dukkha is, and so they achieve jhanas very easily. And so you are kind of on the Aryan level the moment you achieve these things. And so don't despair if you have never achieved a jhana. It is very natural that you haven't achieved these jhana states, because actually, if you did, you would almost be a noble one already, almost be an Aryan. That is the reality of these things. So they're not kind of obvious. And then you have the last one, a meditation at ease, a pasu vihara. So this is kind of the Buddha again being very understated. You're at ease when you get to the jhanas. Everything before that is kind of stress. So this is when ease happens. Pasu is this nice Pali word, which means you are chillaxed and at ease. So this is the idea here. The deeper your meditation is, the more at ease you feel when you come out. And in the jhanas, it's kind of the highest kind of ease. And of course, some of these jhanas that can last very, very long time, like hours and hours and hours. If the deeper the jhana, the longer it can be, 10 hours or whatever. And when you come out, you might think you would be stiff and your legs would hurt or whatever, but no, you feel 100% at ease when you come out of these things. That's kind of what is interesting about them. One of the things that is interesting about them. So have you achieved any of these things? And then Venerable Anuruddha replies, he says the following, well, sir, while meditating diligent, keen and resolute, we perceive both light and a vision of forms. But before long the light and the vision of forms vanish. We haven't worked out the reason for that. So they haven't achieved the jhanas yet, apparently. But they have perceiving a light and a vision of forms. And of course, a light and a vision of forms, well, this is essentially what these nimittas are like in the mind. It is a light, and the light has a particular shape, usually coming as a circle or something like that. And this is the way the suttas talk about the nimittas. This is how you find it in the suttas. Light or basa, form is rupa. This is how you find it. So now we are dealing with nimittas, and you can see here that Venerable Anuruddha, one of the greatest meditators ever in the history of Buddhism, he is seeing these lights, but they vanish, and he can't really figure out why they're vanishing. And so if you see lights and the vision of forms, you are on the level of Anuruddha. It's disappearing for him, right? He is having troubles with doing it. So if you are having troubles sustaining those lights that you may get occasionally, no wonder you are in very, very, very good company. Sometimes we expect too much of our meditation. These things are really profound. The greatest meditators of the world having difficulties with sustaining these things and going forward. So be happy for the tiniest amount of bliss and joy that comes up, the tiniest amount of kind of peace coming into the mind. Say yay, and if you get a nimitta, remember, don't be impatient. Where are the jhanas? Then you are probably you are just damaging your ability to achieve these things. Venerable Anuruddha Number one in clairvoyance in the history of Buddhism. He was having troubles getting this. Not only him, but also his two friends here, Nandiya and Kimbulan. You are in really, really good company. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with this. So now comes what is even more interesting. If you think that's interesting, the next one even more interesting. So he says, we haven't worked out the reason for that. And then Buddha replies, well, you should work out the reason for that. And then he says, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening, I too perceived both light and vision of forms. But before long, my light and vision of forms vanished. It's not just Anuruddha, but it is the Buddha himself who was having problems sustaining these nimittas. So this is kind of this tells you something about how profound these things are and how subtle they are and how much practice it takes to be able to sustain these things and to take them kind of further and take them all the way into the jhanas. These are not kind of obvious things, And this is, I think, is one of the kind of, I shouldn't criticize my own teacher, but should I? I don't want to, it's not a criticism, it's more like sometimes Ajahn Brahm makes it sound so easy. You just sit down, you close your eyes and you wait and bang, you go into jhana. That's kind of Ajahn Brahm's method for entering the jhanas. And I think he must have come straight from the Brahma Loka, because that's kind of how he does his meditation. And so sometimes it makes it sound so easy, but I think then people may get impatient perhaps, and they may think, oh, I should be getting this if it's that easy. He just wants to encourage people. I know that's what he wants to do. But actually, sometimes it may not work out as you think, and it's no surprise if it doesn't, because these things are very profound to the point where the Buddha himself is having kind of problems and losing that sight of light and a vision of forms. So we are in extremely good company here if these things are a bit difficult and hard to sustain. Anyway, before my awakening, so this is before the Buddha was awakened, while he was a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, nicely translated by intent on awakening. This is not bodhisattva, but bodhisakta in Sanskrit. So it is derived from a different root. And that's why it's a different meaning here. And I think this meaning makes much more sense than the bodhisattva meaning here. So that's great. And then the Buddha goes on. And this is a very common thing in the sutras, where the Buddha talks about his own experiences before awakening. It's very, very common. He does this in a large number of sutras in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya. You find that in Majjhima Nikaya number 4, the Bhaya-Bhairava Sutta, Fear and Dread. You find it in the Dvedavitaka Sutta, the two kinds of thought, which is Majjhima Nikaya 19. You find it in, there's actually a large number. Anyway, I think it's about 7 or 8 or 10 or something sutras where he talks about his own experiences in various kind of ways. So, of course, we have the Arya-Pariyesana Sutta, Noble Search, is a very important sutta about that, and the Mahasacchaka Sutta. So the point when the Buddha talks about his own life, or talks about what he did, the point is obviously that he wants us to do the same thing. He wants us to practice in the same way. He's saying, this is what I did, you should do the same. That's kind of the point. He's setting out the path that he practiced, because this is a universal path that applies to everyone. It is the Buddha himself practiced the Noble Eightfold Path before his awakening. He didn't know he was doing that. He was kind of experimenting. But in the end, those things that worked were the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And so for the Buddha to be a kind of the guiding light for us, for the Buddha's practice to make sense that we should follow along, the Buddha has to be like us. If the Buddha is not like us, if the Buddha is something who does kind of amazing psychic powers and who has been practicing for 4 incalculable eons after taking a vow under the Buddha Dipankara 24 Buddhas ago as the ascetic Sumedha, and he kind of does all of these things that are kind of outside of ordinary human experience, it becomes very difficult for us to relate to the Buddha. And the more you kind of read in the commentaries and in later Buddhism and all of these things, the more foreign and alien the Buddha seems to us, because you can no longer relate to him as a person. He becomes this, wow, the Buddha. And I know many people who grow up in Buddhist countries, that's exactly the feeling they have about the Buddha. The Buddha is just outside of reach. Surely you can't just sit down with the Buddha and have a discussion and have a cup of tea with the Buddha. Is that possible? Of course you can have a cup of tea with the Buddha. That's almost what you see in the suttas. Yeah. What kind of tea would you like, Venerable Buddha? So this is the thing, and this is kind of, you almost have to try really hard to envisage that. And that is one reason why, when you read the suttas, read the little things about how the Buddha behaves, how he is around the monks and the lay people. That's why I was reading this out before, explaining how the monks even rejected the Buddha in certain places, how he washes his own feet, because that humanizes the Buddha. It makes the Buddha one of us, rather than something which is completely separate. And then, when you read what the Buddha did, you think, wow, okay, I can do the same. It is not something, a separate kind of path. The path is the same for everyone. And so, having kind of laid that foundation, now we are ready to look at these nimittas and to try to understand how they arise, what makes them disappear, how we can ensure that we kind of eventually stabilize those nimittas and eventually take them all the way to the jhanas. So that is going to be for tomorrow morning here. Okay, very good everyone. So please enjoy yourself, and we'll see you back again at 7:30 this evening.